you don't hesitate to post because you're shy, that's the surface explanation people like to give you. But what's actually happening runs deeper than that. The moment you even think about sharing something, your awareness shifts. It's no longer just a photo or a sentence or a passing thought. It becomes an experience. You start to feel the presence of people who haven't even seen it yet. You imagine their reactions, their interpretations, the subtle judgments they might not even realize they're making, and suddenly what was simple becomes heavy. For most people, posting online is almost mechanical. They capture a moment, they upload it, and they move on. There's a kind of emotional distance in that process. But you don't have that distance. You feel connected to the outcome before it even exists. It's like your mind is running simulations in real time, scanning for emotional consequences, not because you're insecure, but because you're aware. Aware of how words can be misunderstood, aware of how tone can shift meaning, aware of how quickly people form opinions based on fragments. So when you're about to post, it doesn't feel like you're just sharing something. It feels like you're stepping into a room where everyone is already looking at you. Even if logically you know that's not true, your mind doesn't operate on logic in that moment. It operates on perception, and your perception is amplified. You can almost feel the silent reactions before they happen, the curiosity, the indifference, the quiet judgment, the comparison. It all plays out in your head as if it's already real. And that creates a kind of pressure most people never experience, because for them, attention is something that comes after the action. For you, it's something that exists before it. You're not reacting to being seen, you're anticipating it. And anticipation, when it's that vivid, can feel just as intense as the real thing. This is why something as simple as posting can feel draining before you've even done it. You're not just pressing a button, you're processing layers of human response, emotional nuance, and social dynamics all at once. It's a depth most people don't even notice, let alone navigate. And over time, your mind starts to associate posting with that weight, not consciously, but automatically. So you pause, you rethink. Sometimes you close the app entirely. Not because at AWS you don't have something to say, but because saying it feels like opening a door you're not always ready to walk through. A door where your inner world becomes visible, even in small ways. And once it's out there, you can't control how it's received. What makes this even more complex is that you're not afraid of people. You understand people. You read between the lines, you pick up on what's said and what's not said. And that level of understanding makes you more selective because you know that once something leaves you, it no longer belongs to you. It becomes part of other people's interpretations, moods, and perspectives. So when someone tells you just post, it's not a big deal, they're speaking from a completely different experience. For them, it isn't. For you, it is. Not because you're overthinking, but because you're perceiving more than what's visible on the surface. And in a world that rewards constant sharing, your hesitation can feel like something is wrong with you, but it's not. It's simply that your awareness doesn't turn off when the screen turns on. You don't just see a platform, you feel the people behind it, and that changes everything. So the next time you find yourself holding back, understand this clearly. You're not afraid of posting, you're aware of being seen. And then there's the part most people never see, the silent process that happens before anything ever gets posted. Because for you, it's never just type and share. It begins the moment an idea forms. A simple caption doesn't stay simple. It expands. It branches out into possibilities. You start looking at it from different angles, different interpretations, different emotional tones. One sentence becomes five versions in your mind, each carrying a slightly different weight. You read it once as yourself, then again as someone who might misunderstand it, then again as someone who might take it personally. You adjust a word, then another, not because it's wrong, but because it might feel wrong to someone else. And this process doesn't feel forced, it happens automatically. Like your mind is wired to anticipate reactions before they exist. You're not just thinking about what you want to say, you're thinking about how it will land, how it will sound in someone else's head, how it might be read on a good day and on a bad one. Because you know people don't read things in a vacuum, they read through their emotions, their experiences, their insecurities, and somehow you try to account for all of that. So you rewrite, you refine, you remove anything that could be misinterpreted. You soften certain parts, sharpen others, trying to find that exact balance where your message stays true but doesn't create unnecessary friction. But the more you adjust, the further you move away from the original simplicity. What started as something natural begins to feel constructed. And this is where the drain begins, not from the act of posting, but from the mental energy it takes to get there. Because while others might spend seconds deciding, you've already spent minutes, sometimes longer, running through scenarios that haven't even happened. It's not anxiety in the usual sense, it's awareness stretched to its limit. There's also a quiet pressure that builds in this process the need for alignment. You don't just want your words to sound good, you want them to feel right. You want them to represent you accurately, without distortion. Because you know how easily tone can be lost online, how quickly something genuine can come across as something else entirely. So you keep adjusting, thinking one more small change will fix it. One more tweak will make it clear enough, safe enough, precise enough. But clarity, when you chase it this way, keeps moving further away. And eventually, you reach a point where the effort no longer feels worth it. You look at what you've written, and instead of seeing something ready to share, you see something that's been overworked, overthought. It no longer feels like a natural expression, it feels like something you had to engineer. And that disconnect is enough to stop you, so you don't post it. Not because you had nothing to say, but because you felt too much while trying to say it. And over time, this pattern becomes familiar. The idea comes, the process begins, the energy drains, and the post never makes it out. From the outside, it looks like inactivity, but internally, there was a full cycle of thought, emotion, and refinement that simply didn't result in action. This is something most people won't understand because they don't experience that level of internal filtering. They express, then they adjust based on feedback. You adjust before expression even happens. You try to resolve every possible outcome in advance, which leaves no space for spontaneity. And spontaneity is what social media quietly demands. Quick thoughts, immediate sharing, low resistance. But your mind doesn't operate in low resistance when it comes to communication. It moves with depth, with precision, with awareness of impact. So what feels simple to others becomes complex for you not because you're making it difficult, but because you're seeing more within it. And eventually you reach a point where silence feels easier than perfection. Because for you, it's never just about saying something, it's about saying it in a way that leaves nothing misunderstood. And even when you do consider posting, there's another layer that quietly pulls you backhand. It has nothing to do with fear or overthinking. It's the feeling you get when you imagine the response, not the numbers, but the nature of it. Because deep down, you already know what most of that attention will look like. Quick likes, passing reactions, people scrolling, tapping, moving on without ever really engaging with what you meant. And that's where something inside you disconnects. Because you're not looking for attention in its most basic form. You re-looking for something real, something that feels like it actually reached someone. A moment where another person doesn't just see what you shared, but understands it, feels it, connects with it in a way that goes beyond a surface reaction. And when you compare that kind of connection to what social media usually offers, it starts to feel empty. It's not that you think you're above it, it's that it doesn't match the way you experience things. When you speak, you mean it. When you feel something, it carries weight. So naturally, you expect the same depth in return. But what you often get instead is a form of validation that feels detached, almost automatic. A like doesn't tell you what someone actually felt. A short comment rarely reflects the full impact of your words. And views, they're just numbers. There's no emotion in them, no context, no real sense of connection. And for someone who naturally reads into meaning, that absence becomes noticeable. So even when the response is positive, it doesn't always register as fulfilling. It feels incomplete, like something is missing beneath the surface. And over time, you start to realize that the system itself isn't designed for the kind of depth you value. It rewards visibility, consistency, and simplicity. But depth slows things down. It requires presence, attention, and emotional investment, things that don't always align with how people consume content. And that creates a quiet resistance in you. Because part of you knows that to succeed in that space, you might have to simplify yourself, to reduce your thoughts into something more digestible, to present only fragments of what you really feel. And while that might work on the surface, it doesn't feel honest to you. It feels like trading meaning for engagement. So you hesitate not because you don't want to be seen, but because you don't want to be seen in a way that strips away the depth of who you are. There's also a subtle awareness that comes with this. You can sense when people engage out of habit rather than intention, when reactions are given without real thought. And once you notice that pattern, it becomes difficult to ignore. You start to question the value of the interaction itself, not in a negative way, but in a way that makes you more selective about where you put your energy. Because for you, attention only matters when it carries. Presence, when it feels like there's a real person on the other side, not just a passing interaction. And when that kind of connection is rare, your motivation to seek it in a space built for speed naturally decreases. So From the outside, it might look like you're uninterested in attention, but that's not the truth. You're uninterested in attention that doesn't mean anything. You're drawn to depth, to sincerity, to moments where something genuine is exchanged. And when those moments feel unlikely, silence starts to feel more aligned than participation. Because you're not avoiding connection, you're refusing to replace it with something that only looks like it. And even if you move past the hesitation, past the overthinking, past the question of whether it's worth it, there's still something else that makes posting feel different for you. It's what happens after. Not externally, but internally. Because once something is out there, it doesn't just exist on a screen, it stays with you. Most people can separate themselves from the response. They read a comment, they react for a moment, and then they move on. But you don't experience it that way. You don't just see reactions UF, feel them. A single sentence, a small shift in tone, even something subtle, it doesn't pass through you quickly. It lingers. It settles somewhere deeper than it should. And it's not only negative reactions that affect you. Even neutral or slightly off responses can stay in your mind longer than expected. You start replaying them, trying to understand what was meant, what was felt behind the words. Not because you're looking for problems, but because your mind naturally looks for meaning. It tries to read what's beneath the surface. So when someone responds in a way that feels even slightly disconnected, your awareness picks it up immediately. And once it does, it's hard to ignore. It becomes a quiet background noise that doesn't just disappear when you close the app. And if the response is negative, even in a small way, the effect becomes stronger. Not because you're weak, but because you process things fully. Where someone else might brush it off, you absorb it. You take it in, you examine it, you feel the weight of it, even if part of you knows it shouldn't matter as much as it does. This is the part people don't see. They see the posts, the comments, the interaction, but they do. I don't see what stays with you after it's all over. They don't feel the mental replay, the emotional residue, the way a single moment can stretch far beyond its original context. And over time, your mind starts to connect posting with that aftermath, not just the act itself, but everything that follows. The unseen cost of processing reactions, of carrying pieces of other people's energy longer than you intended to. Because for you, interaction isn't transactional. It's not something that begins and ends in a moment. It extends, it carries emotional weight. And when you're exposed to multiple reactions at once, that weight can build without you even realizing it. So even before you post, there's an awareness of what might come with it. Not in a fearful way, but in a realistic one. You know that whatever you put out doesn't just disappear after it's seen. It creates responses. And those responses don't just stay outside, they come back to you. And that changes how you approach everything. It makes you more selective, more cautious. Not because you're trying to avoid people, but because you're trying to manage what you take in. Because once something affects you on that level, you can not just turn it off. You can't decide not to feel it after it happens. So sometimes the easiest way to protect your energy isn't to post and deal with the reactions, it's to not create the situation in the first place. From the outside, that can look like avoidance, like disinterest, like you're holding yourself back for no reason. But internally, it's a form of awareness, a recognition of how deeply you process things and what that actually costs you over time. You're not avoiding feedback. You're aware of how deeply it reaches you. And even beyond everything you've already felt, the awareness, the overthinking, the weight of reactions, there's something even more personal underneath it all. Something quieter but stronger. It's the feeling that when you post, you're not just sharing content, you're revealing something of yourself. For many people, posting is casual. It's routine. A moment captured, a thought expressed, and then it's gone. But for you, it doesn't feel that simple. Even the smallest thing you share can feel like it carries a piece of your inner world with it. Not because it actually reveals everything, but because you experience it as if it does. A photo isn't. That's just a photo. A sentence isn't just a sentence. It feels like a window, small maybe, but still open. And once it's open, you can't fully control who looks through it or what they see from their side. You know that people interpret things differently. You know they project their own thoughts, their own assumptions, their own emotions onto what you share. And that awareness makes you more guarded. It's not that you're hiding something, it's that you value what's inside enough to protect it. There's a difference. Because when you feel deeply, your inner world isn't surface level, it's layered, it's complex. It holds thoughts and emotions that don't always translate easily into simple posts or quick captions. And trying to compress that depth into something small enough for a screen can feel unnatural, almost like reducing something meaningful into something easily consumed. So you hesitate, not because you don't want to express yourself, but because you don't want to misrepresent yourself You don't want to show a version of you that feels incomplete or slightly off, even if no one else would notice, because you would. And that creates a quiet tension. A part of you wants to see, hair, to connect, to express what's real. But another part of you pulls back, reminding you that once something is out there, it's no longer fully yours. It becomes something people can interpret, respond to, even misunderstand. And for someone who feels things deeply, that lack of control matters. There's also a natural instinct in you to keep certain things private, not out of fear, but out of respect for your own depth. You don't feel the need to display everything you think or feel. In fact, some of the most meaningful parts of your experience feel too personal to put into a public space. Not because they're secret, but because they're significant. And social media, by its nature, asks you to do the opposite. It encourages openness, visibility, constant sharing. It rewards those who reveal more often, more quickly. But that rhythm doesn't always match yours. You move differently. You process things before you express them. You understand them before you show them. So when you're faced with the idea of posting, it's not just a question of what should I share. It becomes how much of myself am I comfortable putting out there right now. And sometimes the answer is not much. And that's where the hesitation comes from. Not from insecurity, but from self awareness. From knowing that your inner world isn't something you want to expose carelessly. It's something you choose to share intentionally, in the right moments, in the right ways. So while others might post without a second thought, you pause, you consider. You feel the weight of what it means to be seen, even in small ways. And that awareness makes you more selective, more reserved, more intentional. Because to you, posting isn't just expression, it's exposure. And after everything we've explored, the awareness, the overanalysis, the depth you crave, the way you absorb reactions, the need to protect your inner world, there's one more truth that quietly ties it all together. It's not just that posting feels uncomfortable, it's that your natural position has never been the one on display. You've always been more at ease observing than performing. Not in a passive way, but in a deeply attentive way. You notice things most people miss: the shift in someone's tone, the meaning behind a pause, the difference between what someone says and what they actually feel. Your attention doesn't skim the surface dash, it lingers, it studies, it understands, and that ability naturally places you in a different role. You're the one who reads the room, not the one trying to control it. So when you step into a space like social media, where the expectation is to present, to perform, to consistently put yourself forward, it creates a subtle friction because that's not where your strength has been built. Your strength is in perception, not projection. You don't need to be the center of attention to feel engaged. In fact, too much attention can feel unnatural, not because you lack confidence, but because it pulls you out of the position where you see most clearly. When you're being watched, your awareness shifts. It turns inward. You start noticing yourself being perceived instead of freely observing everything else. And that shift can feel uncomfortable because when you're observing, you're grounded, you're steady. You understand what's happening around you. But when you're the one being observed, that clarity changes. You become part of the environment you usually read. And for someone who naturally operates from awareness, that can feel disorienting. So without even thinking about it, you gravitate back to where you feel most aligned. You scroll instead of post. You watch instead of share. You understand instead of explain. Not because you have nothing to say, but because you don't feel the need to constantly place yourself in the spotlight to exist. There's also a certain independence in this. You don't rely on being seen to feel valid. Your sense of understanding comes from what you notice, what you process, what you quietly make sense of. And because of that, the pressure to participate in visible ways is lower for you than it is for most. But at the same time, there's a quiet conflict that can come with it. Because part of you knows you could share meaningful things. You could express insights, perspectives, depth that others might actually benefit from. But stepping into that role requires shifting out of your natural position, and that's not always easy. It's not about fear of visibility. It's about misalignment with it. You're not designed to constantly broadcast. You're designed to understand, to see patterns, to read people, to notice what's beneath the surface. And in a world that rewards visibility, that kind of depth often stays hidden, not because use it lacks value, but because it doesn't demand attention. So what you experience isn't hesitation without reason. It's your nature pulling you toward observation, while the environment pulls you toward exposure. And when those two don't align, you choose what feels most natural. You choose to stay where your awareness is strongest. You choose to remain in the position where you see clearly rather than where you're simply seen. Because for you, understanding has always mattered more than being noticed.